Hello everyone. For learning outcome number 7 of module 5, we're going to be focusing on the upper limb blood vessels. We have covered all the blood vessels that leave the base of the heart all the way to the subclavian. So as we talk about the arteries, we can see over here the aortic arch that will give rise to the brachiocephalic trunk, the left common carotid artery, and the left subclavian. And remember that the brachiocephalic trunk will then give rise to the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian. So after leaving the thoracic cavity and passing over the outer border of the first rib, the subclavian artery will then become the axillary artery. So it's not a branching, it's just the same artery that then receives a different name after it passes the outer border of the first rib. Now, once the axillary artery passes the teres major, which is this muscle right over here, it becomes the brachial artery. Then the brachial artery will continue to run down on the humerus, so on the arm, and it will split into the radial and ulnar arteries at the level of the elbow, as we can see over here. More specifically, at what we call the cubital fossa, that's formed by the boundaries of these structures, as we can see over here. So the superior border is going to be limited by the epicondyles, so the lateral and medial epicondyles, and then the brachioradialis will form the lateral border, and the pronator teres forms the medial border. So we can see the triangle right over here. Notice how the arteries are deep. And when we look at the left side of the model, therefore the right side of this image, we can see the subclavian. So the left subclavian artery, this would be your first rib. Therefore, after it passes it, it would become the axillary artery. Once it passes the scapula, it becomes the brachial. And notice how there are several collaterals to the brachial, but right over here at the elbow joint, that's where the brachial splits into the radial and ulnar arteries. And remember that this is pronated, so just follow the blood vessel. So this would be your ulnar artery, and this would be your radial artery. Now the collaterals, they are either the superior or inferior ulnar collaterals, which you don't really need to know. But I just want you to keep in mind that the brachial will split at the level of the elbow. So this one over here would be your inferior ulnar collateral, and this one up here would be your superior ulnar collateral. And then on the limb model, because this is the clavicle over here, therefore right underneath it would start the first rib. So all of this would be your axillary artery, that once it passes the teres major, it becomes the brachial artery, and it does not split over here, right? It continues down, and it splits at the level of the elbow. So all of this is going to be your brachial artery that then comes and becomes, with the pinky, it becomes the ulnar artery, and with the thumb, it becomes the radial artery. The veins are a little bit more complicated because we have more veins than we have arteries, right? We have the superficial veins and we don't have superficial arteries. But let's talk about the arteries that we know and compare those to the veins that will correspond to them, and then we'll add the superficial veins. Because of the model that we have, I think it's easier for us to start from the upper part of the upper limb, going down, just like we do with arteries. So this would be your right subclavian artery. Therefore, this is your right subclavian vein. Then the right subclavian artery becomes the axillary. So this would be your axillary vein. And then this is your brachial artery. And therefore, this part right over here is going to be your brachial vein. So this little bitty part over here. Therefore, we can't see the radial and ulnar veins because the brachial vein is stopping right over here on this model. Of course, we do have the radial and ulnar veins in our body. But the brachial vein stops right over here, therefore we can't see the deep veins. Now let's continue with the superficial veins. So again, this would be your axillary vein, that it will split into the brachial, which runs deep, and the superficial, which is called the basilic vein, and it goes all the way down superficially. So once it gets to your wrist, for example, it will be superficial to your ulnar vein if it was represented here. Now the subclavian vein will split into the axillary, which is this one, and then it also splits into this superficial vein that runs laterally, which is called the cephalic vein. So it runs all the way down. So the cephalic vein will be superficial to the radial vein in this case. And then the cephalic vein will communicate with the basilic vein through the median cubital vein, which runs right over here in the cubital fossa as well. Therefore, we can say that both the brachial artery will split at the cubital fossa and the median cubital will run from the cephalic into the basilic also at the cubital fossa. So just to recap, we will have the subclavian. This is your right subclavian. It will split right over here into the lateral superficial cephalic and the axillary, which will run deep. The axillary will give rise to the brachial and to the basilic, which will run medial all the way down. And the cephalic, remember, it runs all the way down as well, superficially. The cephalic and the basilic will be reunited through the median cubital, which runs at the level of the cubital fossa. Now, because the brachial only ends over here on the model, we can't see the radial and ulnar veins, but these would be deep parallel to the radial and ulnar arteries. And with this, we have covered all the blood vessels that we need to know for the upper limbs. Therefore, our next learning outcome, we will cover the lower limbs.